And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before I jump in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out. Okay. Earlier this week, the Berhalter, I'm calling it the Berhalter Reyna report, was released. The investigation was concluded. So it is time to talk about it. The first thing I want to say is it basically, I read not every single word, but most of it. It basically confirmed everything that had been out there before. There weren't a lot of staggering revelations that changed the way that this is being viewed or understood or the way things went down. There were a couple interesting kind of added details to further emphasize specifically the Reyna's behavior and their thought process. But it didn't change all that much at the end of the day. It just kind of shed light on everything, and now it's all out there for everybody to see. I also, before I get into this, want to give credit to Greg Berhalter. There's no excuse for what he did. Obviously, it was wrong. He knows it was wrong, and he's owned it. The Reyna's kind of called his bluff, and he said, fine, I'll go public with it. And he comes, there is no winner in this. But he comes away looking like a grown-up who is willing to be held accountable for his actions, who is unafraid to admit he made a terrible mistake and he mistreated his now wife, and who isn't trying to run from anything. And I have a lot of respect for him for that. I'm going to save his future and kind of what's next for the end of this conversation. But I wanted to say that first because I'm a big, big believer in accountability and taking responsibility. And he's done that. And this report just validated that even further. On the Reynas, which is where I want to spend most of this time. And I started with that because what you haven't seen from the Reynas is a lot of taking accountability and taking responsibility for their actions. It's been a lot of kind of trying to justify it, trying to explain it by just saying, Gio was mistreated. And yes, the other mistake Berhalter made, and I've said this from the beginning, he should not. There appeared to, the report indicated that there was some kind of miscommunication about whether that talk he gave at the summit was supposed to go public or not, and whether it was greenlit that somebody incorrectly greenlit it to go public. To me, that just doesn't hold up. If this was resolved in camp, which is what Berhalter said, which is what everybody else has said, there is no reason to bring it up again and to drag Gio Reyna through that publicly. I get why the Reynas were upset, and Berhalter was in the wrong. And I hope he's owning that too. But there are a couple questions I would like to ask here. Because a lot of the quote-unquote new information here is the Reyna's behavior during and after the World Cup, where both of them, Claudio and Danielle, kind of made these veiled threats that they could take Berhalter down, and Berhalter said in there that the 150 people that were part of kind of the U.S. family setup group, whatever you want to call it, everybody was having a great time except for the Reynas. So I have three kind of questions I want to explore here. First, why did the Reynas think behaving that way was going to help their son? Because this is one of the most disappointing parts of this for me. Obviously, At some point in this World Cup, before the games were actually played, whether it was because of Berhalter telling him he was going to have a limited role, that was kind of how Gio explained it in his Instagram post, whatever it would have been, Reyna Gio came in with a bad attitude, which is why he almost got sent home. And this report also sort of goes through multiple examples of this. It was not just one training session, one incident. That it was multiple days. Berhalter said, knock it off. And eventually, Gio did. But clearly he was not in a good frame of mind mentally. And was not handling this well. I would hope as a parent, your first thought is not to reinforce and, what's the word I'm looking for? Encourage, validate that behavior by complaining a bunch too, and demonstrating that the way to deal with adversity is to complain, throw people under the bus, make threats, and to blame everybody else, to look at the external instead of the internal. Because that is not helpful for Gio Reyna's development as a person, and is not helpful for his development as a professional soccer player. That was one of the most disappointing parts of this to me. Is I would have, and again, I'm not here telling somebody how to be a parent when I haven't been one. And obviously, the other thing that needs to be acknowledged here is the fact that Gio lost his brother, the Reynas, his parents lost their child tragically. Clearly that has had a massive impact on their family for very obvious reasons. So I don't want to just dismiss that. I want to acknowledge that as well. I just would have hoped that from a example-setting parental mentorship standpoint, the message to Gio would have been, this is disappointing. I totally understand why you're upset. Now you get to choose how you will respond. Your coach is telling you that your behavior isn't good enough. Are you going to continue to behave this way? Or are you going to try and make the most of this World Cup experience? And maybe that was the message that was being sent to Gio and just not sent everywhere else. Could be the case. But there was an awful lot of complaining going on by Danielle and Claudio as well. And so, if that's the environment that Gio is kind of operating in, that really concerns me. And I thought his Instagram post was really good. And I have high hopes, and he's coming back in for the CONCACAF Nations League. He's right back into this team as he should be. But this stuff just doesn't go away. Second question. For Claudio Reyna in particular. When he was playing, or when he was, a technical director of MLS teams, would he be okay with parents of players that he was either, his teammates or the players that he was the team he was putting together, behaving this way? He knows exactly how this works. He lived it. He was a professional player and then got into the front office side of this. He's seen it from just about every angle. It's just a very simple treat others the way you want to be treated idea here. Which makes it that much more jarring it came from him and his family, because it's not hard for him to think about the other side of this and how it's received and the problems that it can cause. And there just seemed to be no consideration given to that from the very beginning. It's not like this is just some parent who doesn't really understand and thinks their kid is the best player in the world, and so they're just going to go trash anybody who doesn't start him every single game. Claudio Reyna's had to make plenty of tough decisions. He gets it. And instead of trying to pass that message on to his son, he went after his longtime friend. That part of this also baffles me. And the third thing is the statement put out by the Reyna's lawyer said something about it being unfortunate that only one side of this story was told. I'm paraphrasing, but I believe that's generally what it said. I want to know what the other side of this story is. Because it seems pretty cut and dry to me. Not cut and dry in the sense of, one person was in the right and one person was in the wrong, but cut and dry in terms of what happened. I've been consistent, and I said it before. Berhalter made mistakes. He didn't handle things the way he should have. But this also started because of frustration about Gio Reyna's playing time. And that is Greg Berhalter's decision. And that should be respected by Claudio Reyna, because I would have to assume if Claudio Reyna was, a technical director, if Claudio Reyna was playing, he would want his coach or, his manager, whoever, the coach he hired, to be able to have the authority to do what they want with the roster. And I still firmly believe there is justification for not starting Gio Reyna. That's a conversation for another day in terms of how to best fit these pieces together. But nothing about that came remotely close to justifying even just the emotional reaction that it got out of the Reynas. Forget about the whole, blackmail essentially part of this. And it going way too far. But just in general. So if there's another side to this and something that this investigation missed, I would love to hear what it is. Because to me, this just seems like upset about playing time. When also, by the way, Gio Reyna has not been doing what he needs to as a member of that team. Because if this is accurate, and there's no reason to believe it's not, based on his behavior heading into that Wales game, there is no way in the world he should have started. I don't care if he's the best player on the team by a mile, which he's not. I don't care if you were planning to start him and you think your best starting 11 includes him in it. Nobody behaving that way deserves a start. And quite frankly, nobody behaving that way deserves to play. And this is where I thought Berhalter handled it really well. Because it seemed to be settled. And it was understood this has to stop, and it stopped, and then you bring Gio Reyna back into the fold. You don't have to send anybody home. It doesn't have to be this kind of finality. But you're not putting up with that behavior. Which is, again, the fact that, okay, that got resolved and Gio Reyna responded the way you would want him to, and then he got thrown under the bus publicly. That's where I really understand that frustration from the Reyna's perspective. But this was going on way before that happened. And there were comments made at the World Cup before that happened. And then you also have the part of this about the completely inappropriate comments that Claudio Reyna made about a female referee during some game. I think it was a U17 game or something that Gio was playing in. There are way too many examples of just unacceptable behavior by the Reynas. So what is it? What is the other side of this story? Because one of the biggest takeaways from this is just how involved, how problematic the Reynas have been, how long this has been going on, and how ridiculous they've been behaving. Now to moving forward. Like I said, Gio Reyna it was announced earlier today, he is in the squad for the CONCACAF Nations League games, as he should be. Greg Berhalter, I should also say, the result of this is that basically no crimes were committed. There's nothing to indicate that Berhalter has done anything inappropriate since that incident. And he is therefore very much in the run. I'm just throwing this in there, but very much in the running for the U.S. men's coaching job. The statement didn't imply that he was the front runner or anything like that, but said he is in consideration, as he should be. Because I talked about this from the beginning too, I think. This idea that I am not going to judge somebody for something they did when they were in college, young, stupid, and allow that to define who they are as a person. I'm going to hold them accountable for it, and I'm not going to let it define them. Because I don't think anybody would want to be defined by things they do in college. So I don't, honestly, this doesn't impact how I view Greg Berhalter as a manager at all. That being said, he should not be managing this team, and I don't see a way that he's going to be. It's not really his fault. And you wonder what the Reynas were actually thinking was going to happen when they started doing all of this stuff. And if this is really what they wanted, destroying, 3 decades of friendship. But they did achieve the ultimate goal of taking Berhalter down from this position so that he is no longer the person making decisions about their son on the national team. There is no way you can bring him back into this fold and say, here, Gio Reyna is one of your most promising players. He's going to be a foundational piece to the most important tournament that the men's national team has ever participated in. Figure it out. No. The Reyna family outside of Gio needs to stay away from U.S. soccer for a while, and Greg Berhalter needs to go take the next step in his career, and U.S. soccer needs to go somewhere else. Every indication is that is what's going to happen. But he can't coach this team. He can't. You have an opportunity here to just completely clean the slate. Brian McBride is gone. Ernie Stewart is gone. You're going to bring in a new GM, technical director person. They're going to hire a coach. And then you just start this thing over. You have time. This is about getting it right for 2026. No matter how you feel about Berhalter, because he took a lot of unfair criticism, he is a good coach, 1. And 2, unless Jim Curtin was lying, you have an option available to you that is comparable, if not better. And therefore, Greg Berhalter should not be seriously considered for this job at this point. Because there is no justification for hiring Greg Berhalter over Jim Curtin. I'm not going to get into a manager discussion right now. But I sincerely wish Greg Berhalter success moving forward. I have a lot of respect for him. And he did a good job. He can't control some of the irrational behavior of the U.S. fan base. But he got this team looking really good. And it's always interesting to me that after that England game, after this World Cup, you go ask your random English soccer fan who doesn't watch MLS, who didn't know who Greg Berhalter was, how they think of him as a manager. Way higher opinion than your U.S. men's national team fan. That doesn't compute. So whether it's in Major League Soccer, whether it's in Europe, this should not impede his ability to continue his career in any meaningful way. He can't do it with this team. Again, not entirely his fault. Some of that was outside of his control, and some of it was inside his control. Because even if you feel like you can move past, as hard as this would be to sell, you can kind of move past all of this. He violated the trust of his player. He violated the trust of that locker room. End of story. That is why he cannot continue. This is not about Greg Berhalter, the person. This isn't about what happened with his wife. This is about the decision he made, how he handled this coming out of the World Cup, and the way that the Reynas put him on blast. Fair or not, you have an opportunity here to just move on to the best extent you can by clearing house and starting over. And the other thing I will say in this as well is what this team needed the last 4 years is very different than what this team needs for the next 4. You needed to get this thing back on track. You needed to have a plan, a vision, and get everybody on the same page to get back to the World Cup. Ernie Stewart, he's brilliant at it. Round 16, looked good, came somewhat close to reaching the quarterfinals. Got through qualifying pretty comfortably. Greg Berhalter did a fine job. Got some of his best performances out of his team when it mattered most. That's a big deal. It's fair to wonder, even if all of this hadn't happened, whether those were the two people to take the next step. Because now, you've got one shot. Home soil, all of these core pieces in their prime pretty much. Now this is about, can you take it from where this team was supposed to be to elevating this team's ceiling? Because this team ended up exactly where it was supposed to be at that World Cup. Somewhere between the 10th and 15th best team in the world. There is a chance they are higher than that by 2026. There is an opportunity to elevate this team to a point where they enter with a different level of expectation. You got to know how to get that out of them, and you got to know how to deal with it. Greg Berhalter's never dealt with something like that. Admittedly, Jim Curtin hasn't either. Which is where this idea of a Jose Mourinho or somebody is somewhat intriguing. I'm not going to have a whole manager conversation now, but that's the other part of this too, is outside of everything that went on. It was already a fair question. And then Berhalter did what he did. That made the answer easy for me, and everything that's happened since made it even easier. So, to a certain extent, this is now over and in the past. Obviously, it's never going to be entirely over because this ruined friendships, because Gio Reyna is going to be around for another decade, and because the Rangers are going to be around the U.S. men's national team for another decade because their son is going to be involved. And it's also the defining legacy of a World Cup, which is really disappointing considering how successful that World Cup was. But here we are.